As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Make another statement. Madison said that charity is not a legitimate function of government. Now, can you imagine what the American people would do to a politician who said that? And so what I'm saying is that politicians are reflecting the values and views of the people who elect them to office. And unfortunately, the values and views of most Americans are distinct from those of the founders of our nation.
All right, the next one here, Sweden will allow NATO deployments in a signal to Russia. This is another article from Kyle. So Stockholm plans to send a signal to Russia by allowing NATO troop deployments in Sweden before the country is admitted into the alliance. Turkey is holding up Sweden's bid right now to join the bloc. So Sweden's prime minister and defense minister announced that Sweden's military will step up preparations with NATO in an article that was published on Friday. So they wrote in this article, quote, "The preparations may consist of temporary basing of foreign equipment and personnel on Swedish territory. The decision sends a clear signal to Russia and strengthens Sweden's defense," end quote. So I guess they're just trying to show that they're, basically, that they're going to be joining NATO before it actually happens. They're going to want U.S. troops on their territory, I am sure. And we know that it looks like the U.S. is going to be building bases in Finland, the newest NATO member, under this military cooperation agreement that they're working out. And I'm sure that we'll probably see that in Sweden as well. So the next one here, Rand Paul says that Congress is beating the war drums for China. So this is from Responsible Statecraft, and this is good to see Senator Paul speak out against all the China war hawking that's been going on. This article is from Kelly Vlahos. So Senator Paul acknowledged on Thursday that his fellow Republicans are obsessed with China. War with China, that is. The Kentucky Republican told an audience at the American Conservatives annual foreign policy conference that he is concerned that hawks on Capitol Hill are going to march the country right into a conflict. He said, quote, "You come to my Republican caucus and you'll hear the beating of drums. These drums for war with whomever, but primarily war with China. Everything is about war with China," end quote. And, he's right. This is something I'm always going over, is how, hysterical Congress is, especially Republicans. But I mean, the Democrats are just as bad. They've pretty much caught up here. So Paul said, quote, "I was in Hawaii recently talking with some folks from our military out there in the Pacific. One of the higher ranking members came up to me and said, 'Take this message back to your fellow senators. War with China is not inevitable,' end quote." And he said that they should be talking about how to avoid war with China, not making it inevitable. I mean, Biden has said explicitly that he would intervene if China attacked. And in Congress, they keep introducing legislation to fundamentally change the U.S. relationship with Taiwan. That's another thing Paul said in his speech. So, I mean, Rand Paul, what he thinks, usually is not is different from most members of Congress. So, it's not like because he's saying this that there's other people in Congress thinking this. I think, unfortunately, that it still is the case that the vast majority of Congress is all in on the China war hawking. But still, I think it's just good to see somebody at least speaking out, and somebody, on the right. So the Post report cited a document allegedly leaked to Discord by Airman Jack Teixeira. Although, again, they didn't publish this document. I wish that they would publish these documents that they are reporting on. I don't get why they don't. But this report said that MBS claimed that he would not deal with the Biden administration anymore if Biden imposed consequences on Riyadh over the OPEC cuts like he said he would. Biden was very angry. The Democrats were very mad at the Saudis for going along with these OPEC oil production cuts because it was October 2022, right before the elections. So the report said that MBS promised major economic consequences for Washington if Biden retaliated, but it's unclear if the Saudis made the threat directly to the U.S. or if MBS's warning was intercepted by the U.S. spying on him. It's also unclear what economic consequences MBS had in mind. We know that the Saudis could put some economic hurt on the U.S. if they stopped trading oil using the U.S. dollar. That would seriously threaten the U.S. dollar's global dominance. President Biden never went through with his vow to impose consequences on the Saudis, and his administration has been working lately to improve the relationship after Riyadh agreed to a surprise China-brokered normalization deal with Tehran. So the Saudis have been kind of going on their own little diplomatic path here, normalizing with Iran, normalizing with Syria, also moving closer, developing their relationship with China. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Saudi Arabia last week, and Saudi officials made clear while he was there that they don't want the Biden administration to pressure them over their relationship with China, because of course we know that's become kind of their priority when it comes to foreign policy, is really China and trying to counter China's influence. So Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan, he said at a joint press conference with Blinken that Riyadh's ties with China would continue to grow. He did say that the U.S.-Saudi security relationship was still very robust, but made clear that the Saudis are not interested in any kind of U.S. ultimatums about their relationship with China.
So, Walter Williams, has the Tea Party movement been a positive in your view in American politics?
Well, I think so. It has been it's been a movement, or it's been a group of people who are saying, well, look, let's go back to the Constitution. Let's have constitutional principles. But whether they'll be successful or not is another matter. And keep in mind that, if you look at the founders of our nation, they wanted very, very limited government. If you read in Madison's in Federalist paper, I think it's 45 or 48, and when he was trying to describe to the citizens of New York what was in the Constitution to kind of get the citizens of New York to ratify the Constitution, he said that the powers that we delegated to the federal government are few and well-defined and restricted mostly to external affairs. Those left with the people and the states are indefinite and numerous. Now, if you turn that upside down, you'd have what we have today. That is, the powers of the federal government are indefinite and numerous, and those of the people in the states are limited and well-defined.
Some of these videos from January 6th are telling rather a different story. If we can put this next one on. Now, this is from a conservative PJ Media, but they're citing leaked videos shows DC cops were rioters and instigators at the J6 protests. And these are verified GoPro videos that were taken on that day. And it's telling a different story about the role of the police, and I think that has not been sufficiently explored. If we can go to the next clip, this is from that article. Congressman Barry Loudermilk from Georgia says the authenticated GoPro video raises the question of why police officers, who are identified as intelligence officers, were working to stir up the crowd of protesters instead of working to stop an assault on the Capitol. And continuing from that article, at one point in the video, the unidentified police officer equipped with the camera said to another that he thought the idea was to get people inside the Capitol building and trap them inside. The observation by the undercover officer leads one to conclude that there was intelligence about a plan to attack the Capitol, and the apparent response by the police was to let them do it and take pictures. That is very different than what we've been told.
This explains why they had to stack the deck on those so-called hearings, as if that was a legal process they were doing. So, but it explains why they never got to see the information that would serve the defenders. They weren't allowed to see these films, and now they're starting to. But I think there's a law against entrapment. It's a vicious thing. It's a crooked police operation. I think now we're seeing there were various people in there. There's probably FBI, CIA agents, the Washington police, and then Nancy Pelosi was in charge of all this. So that was just horrible.
But if you can put that next one up. Now, I just spent the week in California helping my mother move, and I'll tell you what, that state is an absolute disaster. I hope I never have to go back there. It's just a dump. Here's from Zero Hedge. California bill would punish parents for misgendering children. And this is the representative down there. She's put in this bill. A proposed amendment to a California bill would brand parents who refuse to affirm their own child's gender as abusive and could result in loss of custody of your children. Well, let's go to the next clip, because here is the co-author of the bill, and I'm not sure if this is the required attire on the floor of the California State Assembly or not, or whether it's just a warm day perhaps, but this is the co-author, Senator Scott Wiener, who is a co-author with Lori Wilson of this bill. Last year, he's the guy who suggested that they offer Drag Queen 101 as part of the K-12 curriculum. That is not on the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum, I don't believe, if I'm not mistaken. Drag Queen 101. It grants judicial leniency to certain pedophiles. Okay, that's great. And if you go to the next one, here's a little bit more about the amendment that Scott Wiener and them are writing. Under the code, courts would be given complete authority to remove children from their homes if their parents refuse to affirm their gender. Would also require schools, churches, and other organizations to follow suit or face repercussions for impacting the health, safety, and welfare of a child. So if you don't affirm that your 7-year-old child in your community is a different sex than they are, then you're actually the equivalent of abusing that child and hurting the child.
That there's people who have a little bit of desire to know what's right and wrong, versus the people that are nihilistic as if they're going to come in and steal kids because they won't have surgery that is permissible because they got permission from the government and they were able to, avoid the parents even knowing, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That has to be evidence that there's something real about people do have some have nihilistic viewpoints. You can't know right and wrong. And the other one said, well, there is no right and wrong, so we'll run things because we will fill the role of being dictator of our moral standings.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be one of the worst things can happen to a society where you have the authorities become the criminals and then the people who want to live within the law and change things and work at it have a big obstacle. Because if it starts with maybe a local policeman and then goes to the FBI and the CIA and the worst it gets, then it creeps into the election system, and that is the political system. And we see that now because most people now are not overly confident or confident at all about, the election will sort this out. But the elections won't sort it out if people don't become alert. This is the consequence of runaway democracy where 51% is all you need and you get them any way you want and you can change things. And one of the reasons why the founders didn't even like democracy and they liked more concentration on a Republican form of government where individual liberty and limited government was the big issue. That then would invite the libertarian position, because the founders were essentially libertarian, that you have a non-intervention attitude about individual liberties and the way you live and talk and act with other people, that you're a non-intervention when it comes to economics. All economic activities are voluntary. And guess what? We're supposed to apply that to our activities with other countries, and we shouldn't be a bully. And yet we're in 120 countries, our CIAs around the world. We're usually involved in any coup that exists and goes on, and yet we blame the others for causing all the trouble. So I think that a little bit of understanding of that. So weaponization, even if it's a single policeman in a local office, if it's allowed to fester and grow, you end up with what we have here. And it's a mess. But I think the most important thing we do is discover and define what is wrong and then apply the rules that we should. And I find a lot of guidance in a higher law as well as our Constitution.
In your book, Liberty versus the Tyranny of Socialism, you quote Tom Paine, "Government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil in its worst state and intolerable."
That is absolutely right. And I think that we Americans should recognize that the history of mankind has been that of arbitrary abuse and control by others. The founders were not perfect, but they tried to move us away from that. And the main enemy of mankind throughout its history has been government. That is, if you look at the 20th century, it's the most brutal century in the history of mankind. I think that something like 60 million people lost their lives in wartime, but that pales in comparison to the number of people who were murdered by their own government. And the number comes up to somewhere close to 100 million people are murdered by their own government. And matter of fact, these statistics are documented in a book called Death by Government. And so it shows that it's a strong argument that government is the enemy of mankind. The matter of fact, the framers of our Constitution recognized that. Just look at the language of the Bill of Rights. It says things like, Congress shall not abridge, Congress shall not prohibit, Congress shall not disparage, Congress shall not infringe. Now, if the framers did not think that Congress would do these things, why in the world would they put them in? Why would they put that down in the Constitution? And I've suggested to people that when we die, and if at our next destination we see anything like a Bill of Rights, we know that we're in hell. Because a Bill of Rights in heaven would be an affront to God. It would be saying, well, we can't trust God, you know? And so the framers recognized that the enemy of mankind was government, but they recognized that we do need some government. And as Thomas Paine was pointing out, that the government is under the best of conditions of the necessary evil. And matter of fact, the whole Second Amendment argument about guns, the right to keep and bear arms, most Americans think that the framers gave us the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, wanted to protect our right to keep and bear arms. They think that it was for deer and duck hunting. But the framers actually come out and say to allow Americans to have some kind of defense against abuse of government. And people like Hamilton said things like to allow the American people to protect themselves against their representatives if they are betrayed by their representatives. And who in the world are their representatives? It's the United States Congress. So I think that the framers held a great distrust for government, that Americans today, I think we love government. That is, the average American loves government, and the reason why the average American loves government is because government can do those things for them that if they did the same thing privately, they would go to jail. That is, government can take my money and give it to you, but if you came up to me with a gun and took my money, you would go to jail. But if you go to Congress and ask them, would you take William's money and give it to me? Well, you know, you don't go to jail, but you have my money. I have a very low tolerance for the TSA people. I think this was a number of years ago, but one time I was traveling and I had carry-on luggage, and in my carry-on luggage I had an eyeglass repair kit. And this TSA person told me I could take the screws, but I could not take the screwdriver. And I said, that's stupid as hell. I said, who ever heard of somebody hijacking an airplane with an eyeglass screwdriver? And so he said, wait here. And so his superintendent came up, and the superintendent asked me, and I repeated myself. He said, it's on the list. Either leave it here or you don't get on the plane. And so I would not have gotten on the plane, but the people that invited me had set up a banquet and things like that, and it would have been pretty awful if I hadn't shown up. But I just shown up. But I just don't travel commercially anymore, and now I just travel on the private plane. If people want to have me to give a talk, and it's a very costly proposition, I just will go by a private plane. I just won't deal with the TSA because I'm too old to go to jail, and I'm not as compliant as most of my fellow Americans.